This is an 1897 Winchester. Why do I have it? Because it came into a local gun shop with a Class Alpha safety problem, which is that when you closed the slide, the hammer would drop. Well, the problem with this particular gun is it's supposed to do that. So if you've got your finger on the trigger and you close this slide, that hammer's going to drop. So now here we are. The customer honestly believes the gun's broken. So therefore, I have to believe the gun's broken. And beginning gunsmiths don't get into a confirmation bias. Well, the customer must be screwed up. The customer might have to be trained, but the problem is we got to go through every single nut and bolt on this gun and make damn sure that there's nothing loose, broken, or anything that could cause the hammer to fall in a normal stroking operation. This is a rabbit hole, so we're going to tear a 97 all the way down to 0 and start over. Shall we? Let's go. Step one, obviously, is going to make sure there's nothing in the back end here. This chamber's a little bit dirty, so we'll have to clean it. The gun's just coming all the way apart. It is a takedown gun. And one of the first things we're going to notice is that you see how loose this takedown is? So it's been a while since this gun's been apart, and we'll have to tighten this up a little bit. I think this pin was put in backwards because that pin locks it from rotating this way. When you push it through, I think it should stick through a lot more, and it comes about just a little bit, and it needs to come over a lot more. So a little bit of force is good, a lot more must be better. And I'm just gonna, yeah, it's still going. Yep, there we go. So once it comes all the way around, you can pull the magazine tube out, and then the barrel should come off. Now we're gonna have to get pull the whole thing back, and the barrel comes off, okay? Now, it is nasty. This thing is nasty. And it hadn't been apart in a long time. So we're back to our avoiding confirmation bias. We're just going to assume that if we run all of the problems down with this gun, the problem might show its ugly head. There is a way, I believe, on this gun to slide this back. And when that slides back, this sleeve can rotate and we can take that little bit of slop out. So holding the same camera angle here, we're going to take a look up inside, and we'll see on closer inspection that there's rust up inside there. There's a lot of dirt. It's been a long time since this thing's been apart. Okay, it's got all kinds of patina all over it. And all of this is dried oil. So I'm wondering if all of these nice features down here on a stock isn't just stock lubricant that has been flowing to the bottom of whatever gun cabinet this thing is in. So now we suspect wood integrity. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and we're going to dive in a little bit further and take a look at what that looks like. So part of what I'm doing here is we're going to knock this thing down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. So there's a lot of dirt up inside this screw head. We're just going to dynamite some of this dirt out of this screw head. It may not even be dirt. It may be part of the inside of this, holy cow, redhead stretch-on butt pad made in Chicago, Illinois. So yeah, this is dating the guy. I think the man may have been a couple years old. Sorry, I'm reaching in front, but I'm just tapping all this stuff out of the holes so that we can go in and run these screws out, right? We'll have to go back in and cut these slots because this screw head is barely going down in here, but we'll get it, because when we're all done, we will have fire blued all of these screws. Okay, good. That didn't fight us too bad, but this thing's been in the water, I'll tell you that. They're They're nasty, all right. The back of this is adequate. Not so bad as I've ever seen it. But you can see all this oil. There's oil everywhere. Wow. Thing you gotta watch, you got a screw head down in there, and you don't want to wind up with the screwdriver outboard of the screw head, and as you roll this, you blow the side of the stock out. Now, I've mentioned that before, so you better make sure that you're actually in the screw head, and I don't feel it. We're pretty clean back here, not a lot of rust, but there is rust inside the gun. You can see this. So what does rust and dried on and impacted oil tell me in a non-confirmation bias environment is until we get this thing clean and reassembled, we really don't know what we have. We don't know if something got rounded over. We don't know what we got. We'll continue to proceed on that basis. That pin out, and then let's see here, we're not cocked, so I should be able to just lightly massage this to the rear. There it goes. In case you're wondering, I'm not hitting this very hard. I'm just love tapping it. In fact, if it makes anybody feel better, I'll come in with a plastic hammer if it makes them feel better. Okay, so we got a little bit of dirt in there. In fact, I'm not entirely positive there's a dead animal in there. Okay. What you got to watch is that you don't break the end of this sear off, because that is the sear. You can see that moving, and when you press down on that, the hammer comes down. So you don't want to load that too hard, and it just slides off the top. And then, contrary to popular belief, there is a locking screw right here. Okay. That when you back this locking screw off, and I'm going to take it all the way out because I got a feeling I know what the end of this head looks like. See, there's a notch in that, and that's supposed to roll into the notch in the hammer. I mean, in the pin. I'm sorry, the retaining pin. Here, I'll show you. So we'll take this pin out, and we'll pick that pin up off the floor. Thank you, sir. And what's supposed to go on is that pin goes in, and then this screw rolls around like that, and it locks it in, you see. And that's what's supposed to happen. And then the bottom of this should just fall out. Okay. You should be able to just get all this apart. This should come by, and that should come out. And what is holding me up? A lot of dirt. Okay, let me make sure now. There we go. I got it. Okay, so the breech block falls out the bottom, and then the bolt, I think, is retained by a screw. We'll get back to the bolt. So we're looking at the breech block here, and this is where all the fun happens. So that's the sear spring, right? And that's the sear. So when you push up on this, that's what makes the hammer drop. It's also knocking the the bolt lock, that piece right there, you can see that opening up and dropping in. So there's a lot of long parts in here with a lot of spring on them, a lot of gack. Okay, let's keep going, because there's the mainspring is down inside here. So that piece that's flexing right there is the mainspring of the gun, and it's all in the breech block. So this is where I'm going to spend a lot of time looking, because if this thing is doing something stupid, it's doing because of what's in here. Just making sure here. Once this retention screw is out, you got to get that hook out. And the hook has just enough slop in it that it'll roll up. And we should be able to get it out of here. So the hook will come out, and then a bolt should just fall out the back end unless it's being held up by something. Here we go. The bolt just comes out the back end. Now the way this thing locks shut, when all of this lines up and this is back at full cock, this part will come up, slide up behind that, and it locks the bolt into the gun up against this trunnion pin. So this is the abutment. That's the locking surface right there. There's a lot going on here. You can see all the crap coming up out of this hole. These screws have not been out of this gun in a long time. Okay. So there's a spring back here behind the shell latch. So we can push in on that. And that's giving me a little bit more. Because that screw goes all the way down. It goes through the shell latch and down into the bottom. So that screw's every inch of that long. So I'm going to drop a little angel piss on it here. And we're going to see if we can't persuade this to come out before we go work on the next one. Okay, we're definitely out of the threads. So I just got to try to get some lift on this and persuade this to come up while I'm rotating it. There it goes. There it goes. So when I pull this out, we should hear everything cascade into the receiver. Okay, so that little bad boy, gee, we're lucky that didn't rot in there. You can see the threads, you can see everything. And once that goes down, then this shell latch comes out. And I took them out because they're crunching. There's a lot of garbage in behind them. There's a lot of garbage up underneath that spring. This thing's pretty nasty. So we will now, I got to make sure I keep track of which one's what. This is the right one. So I'm going to set this over here on the bench, and I'm going to take a Sharpie marker and I'm going to put a right here until we know what's better. So I got a right written over on the side of the bench you can't even see. Now we'll come over here and do the left side. We'll see if we can get to that. And there is a lot of gack that's just absolutely burned into this hole. Oh, I can't seem to get that oil to come out of the right spot. All right. A lot of crap that's burned into this hole. So you just walk it back and forth. And you see all the schmutz coming up. Right? Same deal. Put a little vertical lift on this and persuade that one to come out. And It is different. It is different. We'll show you that in just a second here. The shell latches are obviously different, but the screws are different too. But same deal. We got all that garbage up underneath that. You can't feel it, but there's a crunching coming on. That's got to get done. So we'll set this over here. This screw is shorter than this one is, but this screw looks like it's been ground off flat. The left and right shell latches are not identical. The right one has this cutaway in it and the left one does not. So I've got to make sure I keep track of which one is which. Now this is the spot right where you would fly in with your camera and take a picture. And that way you know which one's which, because now these can both be thrown in the pot with everything else and I don't have to keep them separate. Digital photography makes us worthless and weak. Don't be disappointed that I kept going. This thing was so nasty that it was just dynamiting the gun apart, and that's not the order it should come apart in. There were a lot of pins, springs, and screws. I got them all apart. There's only one broken piece in this gun, and it's probably going to run with it, and it's the extractor on the inside wall. There's a spring broken. There should be a tail on it filling this up. This is probably going to work. If not, I'll see if I can either make one or whatever. We got the rest of it apart, but this thing is so nasty. We're going to have to talk about it going back together again. By serial number lookup, this is a 1914-ish, 1897. And yeah, you got to be kidding me. So I want to get this converted out. We're going to do all the conversions like we've been doing for the longest time. We'll boil it. We'll get all this patina off the side of this thing, turn this gun black, get all this rust off of places where there, well, shouldn't be rust. And it's just, I'm 100% confident that we are the first people to take this thing apart since it was built. It's so early, it even has the, you push in on the two shell latches and it'll puke all the shells out of the mag for you. So yeah, let me get this thing in a conversion pot, and when I get it all cleaned back up, get it back out on a clean towel, we'll talk about how this pig works. One final thing, I don't see anywhere on the sear, I don't see anywhere on the hammer, I don't see anywhere on the locking bolt, I don't see anywhere on the out of battery interlock on anything. So I'm beginning to come around to the point that this gun is fine. It just needed to be cleaned and degooped. Original Winchester plug. Yeah, baby. When you boil all of the oil off of a barrel that has a lot of patina on it, this is what this barrel looks like with all that oil stripped off. This had been done in a little bit of lye, which is sodium hydroxide, really, really strong soap. And when you do it, you wind up looking at what patina really is, which is a layer of oil rust. I will card this, put this back in a tank of boiling dihydrogen monoxide, card it back off again, and it will look a lot better. But this is what everybody's arguing is valuable. I've still never really understood that. Same deal with the receiver. We stripped all the oil off of it, and this is what's left on it. We'll give it a good boiling and take this off. But just because somebody doesn't know how to do the maintenance and chooses to call it by a fancy word, which I call patina, doesn't mean that the gun is not decaying right in front of your very eyes. So to illustrate this, here's the before and after on the receiver. We have to show it this way because when the gun's put together, you can't really see it at this level of magnification. This thing is beautiful. The gun was made in 1914 and it's gorgeous. There were no scratches on it. No, I mean, it was lovingly cared for, just it needed to have some maintenance done. So you can see here that rust actually converts back down into the original black oxide, and you have
this.
We're in the inspection phase of this, and there is a very small corner that's broken off of the half cock notch. This is the half cock. The full cock notch, however, is clean and sharp all the way across. So if the sear is clean and sharp and nobody's been in here stoning stuff to make that there trigger pull feel better, if nobody's doing that, I'm okay. So we see now that the full cock notch is clean and sharp. We will come over to the sear. And this is the nose of the sear right here. Okay, and the nose of the sear, I put it in a vise this way to show, other than my dirty fingernails, because I've been carding guns all day. This sear is sharp. Silver line, nothing. The sear spring, unadulterated. There was a lot of tension on it when I got to it. The sear spring is in good shape, and it had a good, loud, audible snap. The back side of the trigger, which is the part that lifts up on the sear, is undamaged. The spring that was in the tunnel, you can see where the spring pushes on it right here where that white spot is. The spring had good snap when it was in the tunnel, and it was being held feathered up against this. Those are the only three things that keep the hammer from dropping. There is nothing else in this gun that keeps the hammer from dropping other than that notch right there. This, you can get this if somebody put the gun together the wrong way, or they dropped the hammer in the wrong spot, or they were trying to thumb it down, but it didn't do any damage to the sear. So while that is a problem, it is not a problem that would cause the gun to go off, in my opinion. However, how this gun does that trick where you hold your finger back on the trigger is interesting. As we can see here, the sear is out of position when the breech block is down. So if the trigger is not pulled when the breech block comes back up, the sear is waiting for you to pull it and discharge the round. If, however, you hold the trigger down, there is no disconnector on this gun. And when that breech block rotates to an approximation of all the way up, the hammer will fall. Hammer fall on an 1897 has nothing to do with the out of battery interlock. And here's where this gets a little weird, because if there's any wear on this gun or any tolerance stacking, the way this gun locks shut is the bottom breech assembly rolls up into position. The notch the tab that's sticking out of the slide handle, the action bar, slides up underneath, locks the slide to the top, and this really long, really whippy little bar locks into that and locks this whole thing shut until you do one of two things. Pull the trigger, and as the hammer falls, the nose of the locking bar rides out of the slot here and trips the lock when the hammer gets all the way down to the bottom, and then the slide's unlocked for you to be able to pull it back. Or you push the button on the side of the gun and you unlock it. So what you're hoping when you're doing a speed rock on this, or I don't know who invented the term slam fire, either way, if you run this gun with your finger down and it has not a totally large amount of wear in it, you could have this gun go off out of battery. Now, there is a lock on the bolt that requires the bottom part to be up and lock the bolt forward to push the lock out of the way to allow the firing pin access to the primer. Okay, I was a nuclear power guy. That's called forcing an interlock. Tempting God, do whatever you want to call it. My advice to you is to not hold your finger back and operate this gun by pushing the slide forward. Just don't do it, because if any of this claptrap is worn, this gun can go off out of battery. And here's what happens when you try to do that. Let me get this out of the way and show you something. This gun was so worn, the barrel fell out of it when I tried to take it apart. But it went off out of battery. So you can see the crystallization. Focus right on the end of the screwdriver for me. So you see this crystalline structure here? This is called a brittle fracture. This thing just popped without a ductile failure mode, and it picked the whole rear end of this mess up and allowed the bolt to come up out of its locking recess down here, came up, tied this whole thing up, and the gun blew up. And when we got it, the bolt was sticking about this far out of the ass end of this thing. In order to take this gun apart, you got to have the bolt in it, and it's got to be in battery. Everything was bent. I came in here with a grinder, and I cut this down here and cut this across the top so I could bend the top of this up and take the bolt out of it. Don't be this guy. Respect this gear, man. It's getting old, and it's got a different manual of arms. So that brings us back now to our original contention about confirmation bias. I honestly believe there is nothing mechanically wrong with this gun that cannot be solved with a little bit of training of the operator, and I'll make sure that he gets trained, and that I'm going to have him sign his name to something that said, yeah, I've been trained about how this gun works, and then we'll give it back to him, not charge him anything else, because this thing is freaking beautiful. So I've cleaned some things up and organized back into functional groups, because I want to talk about some of this interlocking stuff, but I want to show it to you in the hardware. While we were out, we did the full conservation, which we just talked about, and I steel wooled down this. I just steel wooled it down. I didn't take the finish off it. I just rubbed it out and put one coat of Danish oil over this thing, and boy, does it look sharp. I'm not worried about all these oil stains that were running down from the last time. If the gentleman that owns this gun wants it refinished, we'll refinish it. Right now, this is just what it would have looked like otherwise. All right, we're going to put that over there. Remounted the fore end, did the same thing, did a fore end, put this all back together. This tube was very difficult to rotate because it was in 90 degrees out of phase. There's an interrupted thread down here by my thumb, and when that interrupted thread comes through, you have to be able to rotate it 90 degrees. Well, if it's already rotated 180 degrees, that last 90 means the tube had to be turned 270, and you're going to run out of room when that does that. So I got that right. When you go to put this peg back in, let me get this set up right. That peg doesn't stick out very far one way, and it does stick out a long way the other way. So make the end that it sticks out the long way be the part that's down. Here we go. Here, let me get that up. Make that be the part that's down so you get the most amount of leverage, say. So when this would go in, this would plug in, it would rotate 90 degrees, and that'd pop back up, and then that's not allowed to rotate back out. Model 12, kind of the same way, but a lot more claptrap up here in the nose. Model 12's got things that keep this tube from rattling. There were some improvements in this design in the intervening 15 or 18 years. Okay, anyway, we're there. If you ever want to take one of these things apart, yes, you need this wrench. Just order it from some Midway or Brownells. 12 gauge or 20 gauge magazine tube disassembly wrench. If you do not, you will make a mess of this. Make sure you get that. All right. Functional groups. We have the pin that holds the breech block in. We have the two shell latches. We have the two pins that hold the shell latches in. These are just over on one side to get them out of here, and for some strange reason, they have become magnetic. This is the magazine. What am I thinking? The action lock. That's the action lock. The action lock spring, we'll put that in later. This is the ejector. We'll put that in later. This is the screw that prevents over rotation of the breech block. We'll get that in. We have the trigger housing, And that pin, I've heard that pin described as an over travel setup, and I'm here to tell you that that pin's there to kind of time when this whole thing goes off. We'll talk about that. Firing pin, out of battery interlock, action hook, breech block. This is the mainspring housing, which I've already put the hammer back in, right? And we're going to talk about that in just a second. And then all of the things that lock the action shut. And one of the things we're going to talk about right now is why nothing in this pile has anything to do with anything in this pile. As you can see down in the hole here, there's a mainspring. And that mainspring pops out and is held in by a pin right there. So if you drive this pin, the mainspring will come out. Nothing fancy here, nothing you need to know. But here's the big one. That's a fairly powerful sear spring, okay? And that's doing a pretty good job of pushing that down. And as you pull this back, I want you to hear something. Here, let me get my clip up there. There's the half cock notch. There's the full cock notch. We have very positive engagement. Those clicks are what are telling you that you've actually, all those sharp surfaces that we saw, we're talking about confirmation bias here. And once we look at all these locking surfaces, which I've already looked at, I'm going to tell you that I've now come back to the conclusion that the gun is operating and functioning as engineered and as intended when it was built in 1914. There is a bevel cut here. This is not a 90-degree angle. It's beveled backwards like this. This is not a 90-degree angle. It's beveled forward. This is the piece that locks the slide shut, okay? So when this and this are in engagement, this is how the gun is locked. And as you attempt to pull backwards on a slide, it will cause a thrust vector that rolls this up and jams this into the side of the receiver. So the harder you pull back on a slide or push on the bolt, like maybe the cartridge going off, that's something that can push on a bolt, details. This thing will stay locked until what we're about to talk about, which is the hammer comes down. And under recoil, the gun's gonna leave and the foreend's just gonna stay here. So it will appear to come forward, which will cause this to be able to snap down underneath this, unlock the gun, and go do its thing. And we're gonna come down now and I'll show you how all that works, but I needed to show you these bevels in close up so that you understand that there is a thrust vector when you pull backwards that's trying to kick this out and into a recess in the side of the receiver and lock the thing shut. So the inside of this locking mechanism, this bar is going to ride in this groove right here, okay? This recess is for this spring to push out on the pivot point and cause that bar to attempt to rotate out. When it's attempting to rotate out, it's pushing on this pin through the hammer recess and out the other side where it pushes up against this button which sticks out the side of the gun and this spring which pushes this button out at all times. So to unlock this thing, you have to take some of the tension off. The slide has to be pushed forward ever so slightly. And I'm just going to let this roll down now, but you get it. If you push in on the button, this will push through, rotate that, pull that in and take that out of the lock in the side of the receiver, and then this block is allowed to drop, which will allow the slide to come to the rear over the top of it. The other way that this can happen is the hammer can fall. The hammer will bear on this surface and shove this out of the way also, but because it cannot do it before the slide is untensioned by recoil, it will actually bend this, and you can see this thing bending, and it's designed to bend, and you can see here in Bruno's animation that the thing bends as a big spring, and then the minute the recoil shows up, the slide stays put, the entire gun takes off to the rear, there is the illusion that this has moved forward when in fact it actually has. It all unlocks and plop, it spits an empty shell out. So a couple of things here now that I've put this all together. If you push on this tab, you can see that that locking bar moves. And if you don't want the locking bar to move, you can still push on the back end of this, you see, and that's supposed to bend until that comes out of the way. So that was how the button unlocked it. Or if the hammer drops, the hammer will unlock this. So you see that coming up right when the hammer comes down, the hammer unlocks it. Okay, I'm trying to keep my fingers out of the way here. All right, the bolt has the out of battery interlock. So if the bolt is not locked shut, the firing pin is locked out here. But if I push up, now the firing pin is free to move, you see. So that's where we're at here. If you push up on this part, hang on a minute. There we go. So if we push up on this, it unlocks. So the way the gun locks shut is this tab here is riding in this slot. So when the gun is open, it's down here like this, and then as this comes forward, this is drug up. As it's drug up around this pin, it will come up and it will lock. And as you can, whoops, can't see it through my hand right there, but that, you can see the tab coming down in the back. When the gun locks shut, that tab comes down, and that last little bit of rotation is what unlocks the firing pin. And we're hoping that all that happens at the same time and that all these surfaces are true. And then bolt thrust from the cartridge comes through this locking surface here, back down the locking block, and into this semicircle, just kind of like on a martini, except this is two pieces, and into the trunnion. So this is the abutment, and then the gun headspace is up against the inside of the barrel here. Okay, so the last thing to look at is this, and I'm going to exaggerate this. We're going to use that as a pin, and we're going to say that this block rolls down, cartridge comes up on top of it, and then as this tab comes backwards, this rolls up. So what we're looking at is the arc that this sear is swinging through. So ordinarily when it swings through, if your finger is not on the trigger here, it'll come in and it'll touch right here and it'll push down on the trigger. So let me make sure I got all this right, because there's only one spot it'll do it. Right there, it'll push down on the trigger, and then if you pull backwards on the trigger, it will rotate the sear and the hammer will drop. If you have the trigger all the way back and this block rolls back up, it's going to drop the hammer. So what's going on for out of battery does not have, or locking, has nothing to do with tripping the hammer on this gun. And think about that before you speed rock one of these things. Okay, I'm going to finish putting the shell latches back in this gun, putting this thing back together again, and then we'll go through manual of arms at the bench, and then maybe we'll go dump a few rounds through this thing. In broad daylight, I'd have to say this is one of the nicest, oldest 1897 Winchesters I've ever laid eyes on. I mean, this thing is gorgeous. We've learned some things about this gun. We've learned that if you close it, we're empty here. If you close it, nothing. But if you close it with your finger on the trigger, it'll drop the hammer. That's different than a hammer follow. A follow is where it rides the bolt down. A trip, like this does, the gun was designed to do it. But even a gun in this kind of shape, I'm not so sure I would do that to. This one has dual magazine releases. You push these and it'll spit the round out the bottom. That's pretty cool. A little unnecessary and definitely deleted in future items here. It's got a migratory bird plug in it, so this third round shouldn't fit. And it doesn't. Put one in the chamber. So now we have 2 up the pipe, 1 in the hole. There are no safeties on this gun. This thing, not touching that, no ammo, or the slide open. When the gun goes off, the 4-in stays put. The gun goes to the rear, it unlocks, and it allows you to put another round in. So typically when I shoot a pump gun, I pull back on the slide, and the gun just comes open. See? Last round, we're gonna do it once just to show it. Finger on the trigger, and it'll go off when you throw it forward. The gun functions as engineered, as intended, but now we know that without drawing any untoward conclusions, without reviewing the facts.